Okay. All right. Welcome back, founders. Today I have the distinct privilege of speaking again with Owen Power, who is the founder and CEO of Owen Bradley Power, LLC. He has extensive experience in the manufacturing, construction, and e-commerce world. And he's going to go into great detail about that, along with his origin story. Great human being, too. I really loved the intro call, and not only that, he's an active member of the group, which means a lot to me too. Thank you, Owen, for joining us.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate those kind remarks.
Yeah, you deserve them, bud. All right, like what I tell everybody, or ask everybody, I'm sorry to start out, where are you calling from?
I am in Utah in a little town called Highland, which is just south of Salt Lake City.
Okay. And did you grow up there? My guess is no.
I did not. My accent is South African, not Australian or New Zealand or English or anything else that people come up with. Born and raised in South Africa, and my wife and I moved here with our 4 kids back in 2007. So we're about to hit our 19th anniversary
That's a long
of
time.
arriving here in the US.
Now, that's awesome. Now, so 19 years. Okay. So when you were in South Africa and where did you go to, what did you want to do when you went to university?
Well, throughout high school, I wanted to be
Uh-huh.
an architect,
Okay.
which is a little different to what I'm doing now.
Hmm.
But I started to get a sense of I couldn't draw to save my life, so I wasn't sure how that was going to work. But I ended up getting involved with a program that was for high schoolers of my
Hmm.
age. At the time, I was a junior in high school, called
Hmm.
Junior Achievement. I believe something similar is here.
Hmm.
And how that worked is that they brought a bunch of kids together from different high schools,
Hmm.
and paired that group up with a sponsoring company. In this case, it was a technology advisory firm, and we are instructed to form a corporation. And
Hmm.
we had to appoint a managing director and other officers of the board, and an accountant, a production manager, etc. And we were tasked with figuring out what product we could make within literally a 90-minute period once a week,
Hmm.
that we would then go back into our schools and try and get our friends to buy, this particular product. And we'd have to collect the money and bring it back.
Entrepreneurs from that start.
And the accountants would, handle the money, and the production workers would do the production.
Yeah.
And this was a 12, 13-week course. And so we learned how to form a little company and how to run business with the help of these advisors that we
Wow.
were there. And
Awesome.
I wanted to be the managing director, the CEO. And so it was an election thing. So we had to put our name,
Yeah.
down as to what we wanted to be. Then we had to stand up in front of the group and
Yeah.
give this little speech as to why we'd be the best managing director of this business.
Yeah.
I lost, some other
Oh.
guy got the managing director role. So I
Mhm.
said, well, then I'll try out for financial director. And I got that one.
All right.
And I loved it.
Mhm.
This was great. And that then became the thing I wanted to do. I wanted to be the financial director of a company one day. And so in South Africa, that meant the pathway was to become a chartered accountant. The similar designation here in the US is a CPA.
Hmm.
And to become a chartered accountant, I had to do, a degree in finance. So
Yeah.
in my case, was a Bachelor of Accounting Science.
Okay.
And I also had to do a period of an internship or a training contract with a audit firm, so a firm of chartered accountants, which I then did. And so I became a chartered accountant and got into that world.
Hmm.
Never ever made it in South Africa to be a financial director of somewhere because I ended up staying in public accounting.
Okay.
But I did end up leaving Deloitte and forming my own practice. So I did get to run my own business.
Yeah. You
And
were with
that's what
Deloitte? Hmm.
Yeah, I was with Deloitte and then left Deloitte and became, Owen Bradley Power, chartered accountants. And that's what I did until we left. When we moved here to the US, I joined a CPA firm here. So I kind of got stuck in the public accounting arena.
Yeah. Okay. So why did you leave South Africa to begin with?
Uh, Big story. I mean, the fundamental reason was we felt that our children, we had 4 children at the time,
Uh-huh.
would have better opportunities here. There
Sure.
were some safety concerns, and we did have an experience that really kind of drove that home.
Oh, wow.
And that caused us to make the decision to make the move. And so once we hit that point, I applied for some roles, and Deloitte in Calgary, Canada, was happy to take me as well as a CPA firm here in Salt Lake City.
Hmm.
Calgary seemed a little colder than South Africa, so we opted for Salt Lake City.
That would have been so drastically different. Now you
Well,
can make it cold in Utah. It's you can do both. Elevate,
yeah,
stay.
yeah. Summers here are wonderful, but
Yeah.
when we were making the decision, I compared temperature, winter
Yeah.
time in South Africa to summertime in Calgary, because the seasons are split north and south hemisphere, and
Yeah.
it was warmer in winter South Africa than what it was in summer Calgary.
Oh my, that's miserable. Who would choose to live in that? Oh
Well,
my.
we certainly did not. So here we are.
So you come to Utah, and you've been there 19 years now. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So now Deloitte. So here's my little bit of my confusion. You said you worked for Deloitte, but then you also had your own. You had your own accounting firm,
I
correct?
left I left Deloitte to form my own accounting firm.
Oh, you left Deloitte. Oh,
Yeah,
so you just
yeah.
went back. You didn't. You went back because you knew that they would have established
Right.
business when
Right, right,
when
right.
you went, instead of just starting on your own in a new country.
Right, right. Yeah, I had to apply for the job in Calgary, but I guess my Deloitte background, kind of helped with that.
Of course.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Now, what do you see the difference? Because Deloitte's a great, a great company to. I mean, it's very well respected.
sure.
What are the differences when you're in the accounting world? What are the differences between owning your own company and working for Deloitte when it's such an established place?
Yeah, I mean, the size of client is pretty much kind of the thing, right? So when I went on
Okay.
my own, I
Mm-hmm.
was working with small business owners,
Uh-huh.
as opposed to when I was at Deloitte, I was helping work with publicly traded companies or very, very,
Yeah.
very large companies. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I found that I really loved being on my own in my own practice, working with those small business owners, because you're much more integral in what they needed to do. And
Yes.
so I found
Good
myself
point.
more of as an advisor
Mm-hmm.
than an accountant or the guy that does the taxes. And so after I moved here, that sort of continued with me. And so the firm that I was with here, although it was part of a sort of a broader alliance with a larger firm, they were still very local and had fairly, small to medium sized businesses. So it kind of fit in great. And in my role now as a fractional CFO, operating under the name of Power CFO,
Yeah.
I find myself, really tapping into that experience of where I had to do a lot of advising as opposed to signing off on the financials. And so the conversation is more about what do these numbers mean and where do they go?
Yeah.
And I think what further helps me there is that when I left the CPA firm here and I joined a little startup and we sold that and I ended up finally achieving my goal of being a financial director or a CFO of a company. I was then in that role for several years before we sold to private equity and stayed on as a CEO for a couple of years. And I now find that I approach my clients not from well, here's how you make your books right, but more of here's how you run this business. Because I've been on both sides of that aisle now, both the CFO advising, financially, but also CEO running a business. And so that's a very different perspective. And
Right.
your positioning, the way that you help a CEO understand the numbers and what the next key decision to make is very different.
Yeah. So that's why let's go through that process that you did. So you go back, you moved to Utah, you're working for Deloitte and Touche as in the public accounting world. Well, how long do you work there till you make the next change that you just described?
So I wasn't with Deloitte here. Deloitte was
Oh,
the Canada option that we
oh, that was the Canada
chose
option.
not to do. Yeah, yeah.
What was it in Utah? I'm sorry, what was it in Utah?
So the firm here is called Wyden Smith Rake and Prescott. They're now Richie May. They've since sold to Richie
Okay.
May.
Hmm.
And I was with them for five-ish years, 6 years, there or thereabouts.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, again, small to medium sized businesses. So it was an opportunity to be a little bit more of an advisor,
Yeah.
than just being an auditor or someone doing reviews.
Right. Okay. So then, so you worked there for how long? How long did you work
It
there?
was about 5 years.
5 years. And
Yeah.
then where did you go after that?
So one of my clients recruited me, a little tech
Ah,
startup.
okay.
Great little company at the time, was really cutting edge.
Hmm.
Think Dropbox. Dropbox at the time
Okay.
was pretty new in the market.
Hmm.
Um, Space Monkey is the name of the
Yeah.
company.
Okay.
Was doing something similar to Dropbox. The difference being they were avoiding using the cloud or
Ah,
Amazon, to be able to have data sharing, taking place. So there was
yeah.
a physical device that we manufactured.
Hmm.
And this device then created a peer-to-peer network, so all the techies out there will understand what that means. And so the device not only stored and backed up my data, but part of the device was also able to be accessible to the rest of the network, so they could create redundancy between all the devices accordingly.
Hmm.
Great little business.
Yeah.
Really cut my teeth. I was the only non-software engineer in the building.
Wow.
So I got to be responsible for everything from the supply chain, manufacturing the product,
Yeah.
handling the finances, to making sure the refrigerator and the snack closet were well stocked with whatever they needed.
You're doing everything else. How long were you there?
It was short. It was a little more than just on about 18 months before we
Okay.
we actually sold
Yeah.
to a company that most Utahns will know very well here called Vivint.
Hmm.
And so they wanted the technology. They bought Space Monkey,
Hmm.
and I had to give up my title of senior finance guru, and became a consultant because they didn't want me to join Vivint. They didn't need
Ah,
another accountant. They just wanted
yeah.
the IP.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
so I had to consult for a period of time, and then ended up getting a role as CFO at a packaging manufacturing company.
Okay. Not as a fractional, as an actually the actual.
As full-time CFO, yeah. Did a little turnaround. They were losing money, so I had to do a turnaround there.
How
But
did you
then,
turn it around? What'd you do?
a lot of hard work, a lot of fighting with people, a lot of changing of mindset. Dragging a company, that at the time was 25 plus years old. From the way things we always did it this way to new movement. But
Yeah,
it started with getting the books right. If you don't really know where you're at, you're not going to know where you're going.
exactly right.
So we had to get the books right. I had to do a lot of debt restructure, working with bankers to
Ah,
figure that out because there was no outside equity or, other investors.
yeah,
But then it was really making sure that the senior leadership team knew and understood what their KPIs were, how they were performing, and then more importantly, what they needed to do to make those numbers go in the right direction.
right.
A little example of that, the production manager, production was struggling,
Oh,
and when we reviewed, employee utilization, in other words, how many hours in a day were they actually working on orders,
yeah.
and it came back at around 65%, and the
Oh, wow.
the production manager was like, "Well, I think that's really good, actually." I said, "No, if we're not at 75%, we're in serious trouble. We really need to be, 85+%. So despite being the finance guy, I spent a lot of time working with their production manager to understand how he could get his people to go from a 65 to where they needed to be. And when we started to do that, productivity improved and more.
What were the problems? What did you find the problems were?
Just really just a waste of time, just a lack of direction, just a lack of knowing what they needed to do.
Yeah.
And really a lack of visibility as to what they were spending their time on. So we had to introduce, processes whereby they would record when they weren't working on a project and what it is that they were working on. And so now we had visibility into who your performers were and who your non-performers were. But also it managed to reduce waste. What are we spending time on this meeting for? Why are we spending time doing this particular activity? And so once you start to remove those and start to make it very clear that your performance is going to be measured based on this productivity measure, employees responded.
Yeah, that's great. And now you hear about KPIs all the time. Why are KPIs, key process indicators? Why are those so important? Why?
They're fundamental things that help us understand, where we're at, how are we doing. And sometimes you'll hear about leading or lagging indicators. A good key performance indicator, KPI, is going to be a leading indicator for what's coming down the line. So that one that we looked at, was employee utilization, was a very clear indicator to us how we were going to do revenue-wise. Because when you're not working on orders, there aren't going to be orders to ship out the door. So if you're not working on orders, then the amount of revenue that you're going to have at the end of the month is going to be lower. So the more we could increase the utilization rate, the more likely we were going to see an increase in our revenue. And so, finding the right set of KPIs for the business, but then all the way down through to the various teams, kind of also becomes important. One of the key KPIs that we did at that particular business with the sales team was to really track their bookings. In other words, the orders that they were putting into the system. And when we started to track that and started to set those goals, that then creates the book of business to actually produce and generate, the ability to have revenue, going out the business. So we would track every single day, what the bookings looked like and when they were supposed to be delivered. So as we were moving along in a month and we could see we might be a little short from our revenue goal, we were able to go back into the bookings book and find what we could get out the door quicker. And so once we started to do that, the company, sort of languishing around, 1.2 million a month, suddenly was doing 1.5 million a month, and then 1.8 million a month, and then well over 2 million a month, because these were KPIs that we paid attention to daily, and then that started to drive the activity.
Yeah. Now, so they went from losing money to what did you get their gross revenue up to when they were, what did they start at? What did they, gross revenue is obviously different than losing money, but what was their gross revenue when you started to when you ended up leaving?
It was just around the 15 million mark,
Okay.
which was a little down from where they were, the year or two before that. By the time we sold, it was north of 25 million.
Oh, wow.
And by the time I left, it was, north of 35 million. So some regular growth.
Now, when you go through the selling process, did you sell to private equity? Is that what you
did? Yeah.
Okay. Explain that process, because when you're the chief financial officer dealing with someone that wants to buy your company.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a year-long process for me, because from the time that the founder said, I think I'd like to take some chips off the table, that was the moment that I started to actually take the phone calls. Because when you're in this role as a CFO, you get constantly bombarded with everybody and anyone that says they want to buy you, right? a lot of sales guys, reaching out because they have a mandate to find this company,
Hmm.
investment bankers, etc. So just
Yeah.
so many people wanting to make the acquisition. So when I started taking the calls, that meant that I was on meetings just constantly, introducing myself and the business,
Mm.
and getting to know a little bit about potential people that were interested. The timing of such was COVID had just hit. And so, while people were getting used to being on Zoom, I was literally on Zoom calls, for 6, 7 hours out of my day,
Wow.
just talking to people about, potentially acquiring the business.
Right.
So, I mean, how it affected me is that, I'd shifted from at the time, I was also president of the company. I was president and
Oh, wow.
CFO. So I had this dual role, of having to, be in the marketplace trying to sell, but at the same time trying to manage and run the business.
Yeah,
So very draining, as you can imagine.
I
You're
can.
telling the same story over and over and
Over
over
and
again.
over again. Yeah.
Answering questions, providing financials,
Yeah.
responding to questions on those financials.
Yeah.
But we people started to fall off, and we could tell who we didn't want to work with, who didn't want to work with us. Started to narrow the list down. Got to a sort of top four, and narrowed that down to a top three, and then
Mhm.
went through various iterations of, well, we think you're worth this, and negotiating a little bit to the point that we eventually made a decision, and then went through the due diligence process to sell. And so it was literally a 12-month period from the day I started taking the calls to the day we, closing day, signed the documents, and we were done.
Now, how long did you stay on after you sold?
Just about 2.5 years.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
And then so were you looking to your next venture during that time, or did you, because you knew you'd eventually be gone, or?
Yeah, I mean, that there was always going to be, a period of transition.
Sure.
I was the CEO, but that was not going to be my role, into infinitum. So,
Hmm.
I hadn't really made a decision, but once we got to a point where we all agreed that it was time, for me to take my leave,
Hmm.
it was pretty clear to me that I wanted to take all this experience that I'd had and just help reapply it with other businesses.
Yeah.
I didn't want to go back into a full-time role.
Okay.
I started to find I missed what I had, running my own practice,
Yeah.
back in South Africa, where I
Yeah.
got to speak directly with other owners of businesses, but had a variety, that I could work on, and so provide value across a broader scale as opposed to just within one place. So, when that time came, it was pretty clear to me that's where I wanted to be.
How long ago was that?
Uh, Coming up for 2.5 years now.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And did you take any time off before you went down this road?
We did, yeah. I mean, I immediately kind of put things in motion, registered the LLC, and
Sure.
started to put feelers out to my network and stuff.
Yeah.
But my wife and I had a pre-planned trip back to South Africa,
Oh,
and so we took that, and it was great. I had nobody calling me, nobody bugging me. It was awesome, and literally on as we were landing back in Salt Lake City, after the trip, I there was a message from one of the bankers that I knew, giving me a lead for a client, and the next day I met with that lead, and they became my first client within
oh,
just a few
wow.
hours of arriving back. Yeah,
That's great. Now, so you said you went through your network, your LinkedIn network?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. I mean, when I had started my practice in South Africa, you know, funny story. At the time, I was a manager at Deloitte, as I said, and I
Hmm.
felt I needed to make a change, and so I sat down with my wife one morning and said, I'm just not happy. I think I need to do something different. And she
Hmm.
asked me, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I actually think I want to start my own practice. I
Hmm.
had a couple of clients that I, did a little bit of moonlighting with, was just small stuff. And my wife knew this, and so she said, "Well, you've got some clients, so that's a good way to go. How much? How much are your billings right now?" Because
Hmm.
I knew what she was thinking. Right, I'm about to give up the salary, and be self-employed. What's going to happen? In between. So I
Yeah.
said, "Oh, I think it's about 10,000 rand." And she looked at me and said, "Oh, 10,000 a month. That's really not that bad." And I said, "No, sweetheart, 10,000 a year." And at the time, my salary was around
Wow.
250,000. So it
Wow.
was a very, very significant change. So, she was like, "Oh, okay." But she put her faith in me, and she said, "I believe in you. You can do this."
Oh,
So
that's wonderful.
I went. So what was the next step? Is I
Yeah.
literally wrote down a list of people that I thought would become good client referrers. So
Yeah.
not who would be clients, but who
Yeah.
could be good client referrers.
Yeah.
And I just went out and met with those folks.
Hmm.
And gradually over time, referrals came. And by the time I sold that practice before moving here, which was 7, 8 years later, every
Hmm.
single client on that client list was either a referral from one of those original five or from other clients that I had accumulated, over the years. So an
Oh,
entire
wow.
practice, nearly a million rand practice a year, was from referrals, essentially from those five original clients.
Wow, that you picked the right people. That's amazing. That's great
Yeah.
advice to anyone watching that needs to know. Well, if they have a but the network you must have established from being in the positions you were in.
Yes. Yes. I mean, it was pretty significant.
Yeah.
And so when I started this venture as well, I opted to use the same methodology.
Hmm.
And so far, I mean, it's still early days.
Yeah.
So far, the same remains true.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now, do you want to just practice with on your own? Do you plan on putting people underneath you? How busy do you want to be? Like, what's your next steps?
Yeah, we'll continue to grow. I mean,
Uh-huh.
so I tend to try and live my life with intent, right? A very
Yeah.
purposeful life, and
It's
so
obvious. You can tell.
so
Hmm.
this role now for me, given my age and where we're at,
Yeah.
this is really my swan song, I guess. The
Sure.
final thing before I move on to something else.
Hmm.
So for me, it's about building a business that will really support me in that next venture, which would be to make a difference in the lives of other people in some
Mm.
way. And
Mm.
so yeah, as we grow, I will start to bring individuals on. My son, who swore as a teenager that he would never ever be an accountant, has a master's in finance and is working as an accountant for a
Hilarious.
large company.
Good for him.
He and I have discussed, him joining me in the practice when the time is right.
Oh, that's great.
And so, we'll continue to do that, whether it's by organic growth, from referrals, or whether it's
Yeah.
through acquisition or a combination of the two. We will
Mhm.
grow this into, a thriving business that ultimately I will retire from and,
Yeah.
allow that to be, my pension, a little bit of social security, but hopefully most of the pension from the practice.
Yeah, exactly. Now, you're the CEO of a CFO company. Do you like being the CEO or do you like.
Well, when it's just you,
Yeah.
you're the CEO, the CFO, the
That's true.
marketing guy, the guy
Yeah.
that does the work. You're
Uh-huh.
literally everything.
Yeah.
And this is perfect for right now because
Hmm.
every business needs to have sound systems in
Yeah.
place for them to be able to for that owner to eventually be able to step away and enjoy the fruits of that labor, but not have to be involved in the day
The
to
day to
day.
day. Yeah.
So, taking all that experience that I have from many, many years, now learning to really apply it to myself and
Yeah.
building out the systems that at some point when I do bring somebody on, I put them in and there's a system and they can then do the job, without me having to really instruct or direct them,
Yeah.
constantly. So that's very much what it is right now. And so, yeah, I get to learn from my own mistakes. I get to learn what works and what doesn't work. And I get to streamline and refine and improve and, learn from my clients, how I can be better at providing them with what they need.
Now, how does it matter to you the size of the company you want? Are you aiming for a certain size? What's your sweet spot?
The size in the space is important.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding what clients' needs are at different sizes of their business, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
delivering a product to them, that's appropriate for where they are. So for me, it's sort of a $3 million to $30 million range
Okay.
of revenue is a good space to be in. Anybody under 3 million probably really can't afford, what it is that I do. So
Correct.
them having a bookkeeper and, really basic accounting, is typically enough. But once you hit, again, depending on the business, but once you hit about $30 million in revenue, you probably want somebody full time, whether it's a full time CFO or a full time VP of finance. You
Yeah.
probably need a very senior person there. So
Mm-hmm.
that's really the range
Mm-hmm.
for me, and focusing specifically on manufacturing and construction,
Ah, okay.
because that's where I've had kind of my deepest experience in.
Yeah.
And that's is where I feel that I can add the most value. And I just have a belief that the US needs more manufacturing businesses and needs manufacturing to thrive. So, I want to do my part, and help those businesses do that.
Well, with what Trump's doing with the tariffs and things, that's what he's trying to do is bring back the manufacturing. So that should help you, right?
Yeah, I mean that's certainly one strategy, and I have clients that were very severely affected by the tariffs because they do have offshore production facilities.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And so that does impact them in that particular way.
Are
I
they
do.
bringing the manufacturing here?
Um, some of them no.
Oh,
it's just not something they can do.
yeah.
One of my clients is actually out of the country, was also affected by the tariffs because of as they were exporting to the US, they
Mhm.
lost some of that business because some of those US based customers found local sources, as opposed.
Yeah.
So yeah, tariffs definitely do have an impact of starting to keep, more productive activity here.
Hmm.
But it is a double-edged sword, right? It does hurt some folks and help some folks.
What do you think of the overall strategy with that?
There's
I'm
I
not trying to
mean,
be political. I'm talking about business, pure
yeah,
economics. Yeah.
yeah, I mean the pure economics of it is that some businesses are built around the fact that they get supply from overseas because there's something, some of that is done better offshore than what it is done here.
Yeah.
And the economics of it, labor rates, generally speaking, in certain international countries are lower than what they here. And so
Sure.
even if you were to have that productive capacity here, you are dealing with higher costs and therefore you are a little bit more expensive into the
Hmm.
market. Where I was before, some of our raw materials came from overseas, but we did, all the manufacturing, locally. So there we had kind of a combination of the two.
Hmm.
But what was interesting, when during the first Trump presidency,
Yeah.
he introduced tariffs there on
Yep.
China there.
Yep.
What was interesting for me to discover is how quickly those Asian-based countries, businesses, were able to switch their shipments from China to a Taiwan, as an example,
Yeah. Hmm.
or somewhere else that wasn't affected by the tariffs. And
Exactly.
so there was a lot of workaround that happened. And so
Yep.
things was the same product was still arriving here, but avoiding the tariffs because now it was coming via a different
Yeah.
a different source.
Yeah. Well, when you're saying that manufacturing is, which I agree with you, it needs to come back to America, what other ways are there to do it? Do you have any other ideas?
I mean, tariffs is always going to be a short-term thing,
Yeah,
right? Because and they lose the effectiveness over a period of time because once the
sure.
market gets used to paying a slightly higher price because of
Good
tariff,
point.
why make the change, right? And so
It's a good point.
it's always going to be a short-term thing.
Mm-hmm.
It really does become a matter of entrepreneurial spirit, as to making a bold decision to say, yeah, we want to have manufacturing here,
Yeah.
and you have more control over the quality of product here than if you're just sourcing that manufacturing from outside. So there are places within the United States where, labor rates are different. I mean, for instance, you might not want to open up a factory in California, but, it might make sense somewhere in the Midwest, right? Because
Midwest. Yeah.
because labor rates are better there.
Yeah.
So we have great workforce here, and so many of the manufacturers that I work with now are obviously local, and they're thriving.
Mm-hmm.
We have great skill set here, and so I think it does take entrepreneurs to make the decision, take the risk, and establish manufacturing here.
Here. Yeah. So how long do you typically, what's your ideal client as far as time frame? Do you 6 months, 8 months? How long do you want to be with somebody? I know it depends again on what's going on with them, but
Yeah, I mean, I sat down and I said, what does my ideal client profile look like, right?
yeah.
And the ideal for me would be someone that has reached a point in their business where they know that they would like to make an exit. They want to sell. They want to leave their legacy, obviously, because that's the thing that they grew from nothing in most cases. But they
Hmm.
want to be able to make that exit, at a future date. And so, in my experience, typically once someone makes that decision, you really need to allow about 3 years of actively working on the business to prepare it to be ready for an exit,
Hmm.
to be sold to somewhere else. So,
Yeah.
so my ideal client is someone that wants that, wants to do an
Yes. Which
exit,
wants to sell.
but
Yeah.
is looking at a reasonable future timeline.
Yeah.
If somebody comes to me today and says, I want to sell in 6 months, my response is there's very little I can do for you other than just help manage the process.
Yeah.
But your business is not necessarily ready or
Ready.
prepared to be sold. So,
Hmm.
so someone with kind of like a 2 to 3 year outlook is great because now we can come in, assess where we're at, and then start to get it ready to do that. So move the KPIs from where they are to where they should be,
Hmm.
start to make the decisions that will change the business sufficiently in the next 2 to 3 years that you
Hmm.
can maximize that exit value, at the end of the day. So that's the ideal client. Now, not everybody, is wanting to do that. They just really want to help grow. And so, those kind of engagements, may last a year or so,
Hmm.
because that's,
So are they looking to you to increase their gross revenue to find
yeah,
other
yeah,
other economic
you're right.
other revenue streams?
Right. Many businesses I encounter are going, we used to be making so much more money with less revenue.
Yeah,
We don't understand what's going on.
that's a bad.
Right.
That's got to be a big problem.
Right. And so
Mhm.
then that becomes my role is to understand, well, where are they
Yeah,
at? What's happened?
yeah,
And usually it lies in the fact that growth costs money. It literally sucks cash out of your bank account. And so,
yeah,
yeah, you quickly grow the top line, but you also add to your infrastructure to be able to support that growth. But that has a cost implication. And, your growth doesn't always outpace the extra costs that you add into that. So
yeah,
it's helping business owners understand that, and then finding out, okay, where have they bloated? Where can we make things more efficient?
yeah.
But then also helping them understand, yes, you've grown, but maybe your pricing is wrong now because your cost structure is different.
Right. You need to
What
increase your prices.
you need to
Yeah.
increase your prices, so there's a number of levers that we can look at pulling,
Hmm.
and that takes a period of time. So,
Sure.
anybody that comes and says, "Oh, I only want to work with you for about 3 months," then I'm saying, well, okay, we're going to be very specific, and it's going to be a very specific project, and
Yeah.
that's going to be the limitation to what you do. So, ideally for me, kind of if they're not looking to exit, but they're just wanting to get to understand their business better and get it growing and be more profitable, 12 to 18 months is a good time frame.
Hmm.
But if they do want to do an exit, I'm really saying, at least 2 years, 3 years, is going to be ideal.
Yeah. What do you know what kind of work you want to do? Like I know that I have a foundation. And do you know what it is you want to do when you and your son
When
have
when I move on.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I will do is go and serve some kind of a mission, in another country, helping
That's awesome.
folks.
Hmm.
Whether that's, helping them, learn and grow and develop in some way, but kind of give back. I'd love to go back to South Africa and do that, kind of
I was
give
just gonna
back.
bring up I was gonna bring South
Yeah.
Africa up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Give back to the country, that
Yeah.
really founded our family and et cetera.
Yeah.
So something like that would be awesome.
Oh, that's great, man. So what I always ask people at the very end, why would someone go to you over another person that's the CEO of a chief financial of a fractional CFO company?
When I was working for the CPA firm here,
Hmm.
one of the clients who was a manufacturing client that I spent a lot of time with, we were sitting having a conversation about his business and where he could improve, etc. And I was sharing all these nuggets of wisdom, with him,
Yeah.
and he was just staring at me, just kind of, like he was mesmerized by what I was saying. And I thought, man, I must really be sharing some good stuff here. I mean, he's just lapping this up.
Yeah.
And I got to a point where I thought, I don't know what else to say. And, I said, well, what do you think about that? And he looked at me and with this absolute straight face goes, if I had an accent like yours, I would have made so much more money.
That's hilarious.
But
Probably right.
as I've thought about it, it is something that does distinguish me.
Of course it does.
But more importantly, I have experience in a different country, in different cultures, in different
Yeah.
ways of doing things. And
Correct.
so when I have conversations with my clients, I have a reference point that's not necessarily the same as what they might have here themselves or from other advisors locally.
Hmm.
So I tend to say that I bring an international perspective,
Hmm.
to what I do. I think at times I think more broadly than what some consultants might do. So
Yeah.
if nothing else,
Good.
my accent, but at least my international experience, I think is the
Yeah,
key.
at least they get to enjoy listening to you talk when you do.
Right.
By the way, how do people reach you?
Owen at powercfo.cpa would be great. I'm also on LinkedIn, Owen Power, and happy to take a DM on LinkedIn, connect with me there.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
You're awesome, Owen. I love your approach to life. I agree that the accent helps a great deal, but no, just your calming approach to. You're very calm. You are intentional, and I've enjoyed my conversations with you. And I thank you for being a part of the group and actually being an active participant. That means a lot to me.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it.
You have a great weekend.
You too.
All right, take care. See you.
Ciao.